Hi everyone, Dr. Nicole LaPera, the holistic psychologist here. Today's video is on how trauma affects the body. I'm going to talk a little bit about how trauma affects the body and polyvagal theory, where it is really based in, and then I'm going to talk about the consequences of carrying and housing this trauma in our body and in our minds, as a lot of us do. So polyvagal theory, developed by an amazing man named Stephen Porges, in my opinion, is revolutionizing the field of psychology. I think for a long time, a lot of us weren't really aware of two things, of really the long-standing impact of trauma and how expansive trauma is, meaning a lot of us are carrying some trauma into our adult lives and are really being impacted. And when I say polyvagal, what polyvagal is actually it's a nerve. So when we're talking about polyvagal theory and trauma in this way, we're talking actually about our nervous system and dysregulation that comes and that we live within our nervous system. So you can imagine our nervous system is pretty important. It runs all of our body's physiological processes, in addition to the mental world, the brain, where our mind is housed. So if we're struggling, if we're having dysregulation at that really core level, you can probably imagine that there are a lot of consequences that we're living. So when we're children, we are born onto this planet with a inability to regulate our nervous system, really an inability to regulate anything. That's why as infants, we're really dependent. We need someone to care for our physical needs. We need someone to care for our body's energetic and emotional needs to help regulate us. When we get that regulation, let me start there, we develop safety and a sense of security, usually with one or multiple caregivers, essentially the people that are helping us as a little infant. And over time, when we cry, if we get our need met, or when we're upset emotionally, if we are soothed and brought back into that balance and that equilibrium state, we develop an anticipation or a prediction that that'll continue to happen in the future. So we feel safe, we feel secure in that relationship. So once we have that core sense of safety and security, now we open up ourselves to the beautiful interpersonal nature that we as humans are gifted within our species, meaning we have communication, we can mirror each other, we can be reflected back, we can be known. So what this looks like in childhood is having a parent, a caregiver show up for us and reflect back to us. So when we're upset, this is a person who can help us understand what's happening for us. They're not us in that moment, but they can help us to make sense of maybe the thoughts that we're having or the feelings that we're having in our body, and they can help us regulate. Each and every one of those moments where we're regulating a distressing emotion, or when we're just joyful, right? When we're having a child, if you're watching a mother and a child interact and they're just in that pure joyous state and smiling at each other, all of these are examples of this mirroring. To be seen and known in a relationship is so important. These are called pro-social interactions. So foundationally, once we feel safe and secure, now we can start to have these positive experiences of being interpersonal with another creature, with another human. That is the whole of being human. That's what it means to be mirrored and to develop all of these amazing skills. What happens when we don't have that sense of security or that regulation, which often happens again because we have a parent, a caregiver, who's dysregulated themselves, like my mother. My mother is extremely dysregulated within her nervous system. So as an infant, struggled to help me regulate. As a toddler, struggled to help me understand myself, my emotions. Wasn't really fully emotionally available to me to reflect back who she saw me to be or knew me to be. Few instances of really feeling seen and heard and understood, right? So before I know it, I had very few instances of that mirroring. I didn't feel safe, so I started to interact like that in all of my relationships. One of the three that I really want to highlight when we are dysregulated, when we are living in trauma, we remember a lot of us are carrying that with us. So the example I'm giving was my relationship with my mother at a young age. However, because of my conditioning, I carried those same patterns into all of my relationships. Three of the big effects of living in this dysregulated nervous system that a lot of us carry are we struggle in adulthood using others or using our relationships to self-regulate. relationships, right, continue to feel unsafe for us, to feel not secure. Maybe we bring our emotions into them, maybe we don't, but we don't have that kind of pro-social experience of coming to another person with a feeling and allowing that to be safe and regulatory for us. More often than not, what we feel is threatened. We feel unsafe in those relationships. So we might not even bring our feelings or ourselves to our relationships. And if we do, we don't have those moments, right, of connection, of intimacy where we're being mirrored. So we lose the ability to regulate or to use relationships as a point of security to regulate. And when I say we're interpersonal creatures, we are. Bringing feelings and having feelings create, or relationships that help us create safety is part of being human. But because we're so dysregulated, because we never had that experience in childhood, we struggle to do that in adulthood. We struggle to use our relationships as points of self-regulation. Another thing that's really confusing and keeps us stuck in this cycle of threat is we actually misinterpret facial expressions. So when we see neutral faces, our nervous system, right, begins to affect us perceptually. We actually see them as aggressive. We see fearful faces as angry. And so now we're misinterpreting facial cues. Facial cues are how we know if someone is safe to be around. So imagine how confusing it becomes for us now if people that were neutral or maybe even scared themselves were misinterpreting so negatively. Again, you can see this loop we get stuck in now. Now I definitely don't feel safe in my relationships because everyone starts to feel like a threat to me. This is in romantic relationships, friendships, family, work, strangers on the street. So essentially what happens, we live this cycle long enough and other people actually do become true threats. We actually are activated in our nervous system, some of us all day long. We're walking through the world in survival mode. We don't feel safe anywhere. We don't feel safe in ourselves because we never learned how to self-regulate in childhood, and we don't feel safe in our relationships with others. And then before we know it, some of us, especially given what's happening now contextually, we don't feel safe in the world. And then before you know it, we're living in this survival mode and everything is a threat. And that's real because we feel it in our bodies. So some of you listening might be thinking, great, now what? Check out my last video, how to self-regulate. I talk a bit more about the nervous system and its development. And then I give you 5 tools to get started to build self-regulation into your adult world and into your relationships. I hope you found this video helpful.